Welcome. So, Colorado, a hotbed for human trafficking? I never thought so, but I'm starting to change my mind. Tamra Farah here. You're with the Human Trafficking Awareness Task Force. Did I have that somewhat right?
Yes, Human Trafficking Task Force of Southern Colorado.
So it's even broken into Southern Colorado.
Yes.
All right. Let's take this from a global level. This is something I was unaware of, and I've become more aware over the years. This type of slavery is a real world thing, and it doesn't happen just in third world countries. It happens in first world countries, including our own. Give me a definition first.
Yes, human trafficking, sex and labor trafficking, take place when someone is kept against their will. So there's usually the involvement of force, fraud, coercion, intimidation, threat, fear, etc. Now, when you're dealing with minors, none of those things have to be proven, but when there are adults involved, those things are a burden of proof.
But that sounds like an abusive situation. It sounds like, we hear the terrible things of a guy who keeps, I forget what city, in Indianapolis or somewhere, where he kept women in the basement for years. I mean, all right, but that's not trafficking. I mean, that can kidnap, that can be all sorts of hideous crimes. But there is a trade of capturing women and children and bringing them to countries like the United States and exploiting them. I mean, how does that work? In reality, what does that look like?
So actually, to add to what I was saying, force, fraud, coercion, and then what happens next, to your point, is that these folks are sold, and in the case of sex slavery, they are sold for sex over and over and over because they're being held against their will. They're sometimes being drugged, they're being threatened, their life is threatened. Plus there's a whole process of psychological dependency, manipulation, and just this kind of sick relationship that is developed between the pimp and the person being trafficked. So you think, well, why can't they run away if they're being sold 30 to 50 times a day, like at the 2010 Olympics, like Jessa was, that spoke at our event at the Capitol this year? You think, well, why doesn't she just jump up and run out of the room? Because there is this incredible hold that these pimps have on the girls.
Where do they come from? I mean, I know every story is different, but give me an example. Do they come from Eastern Europe? How do they get caught into this web?
John, I wish I could just say, I shouldn't say it that way, because we wouldn't wish trafficking to happen in any country or for people to be trafficked from any country. But I'm also sad to say that youth, a lot of kids, are trafficked right here in the state of Colorado. So for example, after a football game, you have a knot of girls chatting. You've got a boy that pops into the circle. Kids have no boundaries today. So it's like, hey, you girls are hot, and the one girl that's like, no, I'm not. They can detect, they know how to detect the vulnerable. And then they exchange cell phones, and then they're texting, and then he poses as a boyfriend, and then a little down the road, he says, I don't mind if you do this with my friends too, and you can make some money. But guess what? She never makes the money. He makes the money. And this web of trafficking gets set up right down at our high schools. And I'm not saying every child will fall prey to that. There's a lot of good kids out there that are smarter than that, but they know how to detect those that are at risk.
There are also women and children who are smuggled in from other countries who answer an ad to go someplace for a better job. I've seen this in Eastern Europe. I've seen documentaries of I'm going off to get this job, and I've talked to the recruiter who's got me a job as a maid, but in this other neighboring country, and they're captured and they're smuggled here, and they don't even know the language. What blows my mind, and help me understand this, is that right outside their door is freedom. All right, right outside, if you pass some place and there's bars on the windows and it's a massage parlor and it looks kind of odd, there might be women in there who don't understand. They could run to basically anyone. They could go to a police officer in this country and be safe. Where they came from, they couldn't go to a police officer, and they just don't know.
And I wish I could say that they believed that they could run and be safe. But there's such a cloud of threat over them, if not just against their own life, against their family members' lives. And it's very real to them, and they're scared to death. But to your point, and I'm glad you brought it back really to labor trafficking. Right here in Highlands Ranch, we had a labor trafficking ring going on, and there were these offers to highly skilled nurses from other countries to come, and we'll give you this wonderful high-paying job, and you'll have an ability to stay in America and get out of the country you're coming from. And they were brought here under false pretenses. They believed it. They didn't know anything about the U.S. or how to navigate around a foreign country. And then, of course, what are they afraid of? They're afraid of being deported back to a worse situation, quote unquote, that they came from. So a lot of
highly skilled people coming, thinking they're getting a job,
Yeah.
and instead they become slaves.
Right. And I wish I had more details from that story, but that was in the news recently out of Highlands Ranch.
How do you measure this? I mean how it's a victim crime, and we can have all sorts of conversations about prostitution a victimless crime. This type of prostitution is most definitely a victim crime, and these people are victims. How do you measure this? How do you become aware of it if it's completely underground?
Yes, you bring up a great point. It's very difficult to measure. All the numbers that we have are underreported. There's just no way to fully report. And part of that, hopefully we can move more and more in that direction with the right laws on the books and the requirements. Even in Colorado, we just started fighting this with new legislation and training of law enforcement agencies in 2006.
All right, when you say the right laws, let's talk about what are the right laws. When you say training for law enforcement, what are they being trained to look for?
Yes. So there is a whole set of criteria. It's a thorough training for police force, various police departments that are opting in to participate in that, and some are even starting their own human trafficking units now. Colorado Springs Police Department just did that in January of 2014. And so they're trained to literally go into these situations where in the past they would have probably called it prostitution, and now they're realizing, no, this is not prostitution. It has all the signs and symptoms of being a trafficking situation. This 17-year-old girl isn't choosing that life. She has been trafficked into this situation.
All right, that's a subtle thing. Let me get on that. So a cop before would go, there are hookers out there, we're going to bust the hookers, we're going to do this, not realizing some of those prostitutes might have something very different going on, and they need to learn those signs that this is not somebody who's doing this freely of her will. This is somebody who's being coerced to do this.
Exactly.
What are those signs? What is it the cop is going to look for?
Well, there's just, it's a very thorough scenario in which that they are trained to identify that, ask the right questions, discern and determine the psychological dynamics that are going on rather than just sort of glossing over that. You also asked about legislation. The Polaris Project rates every state in the United States. In 2011, we had an F in Colorado.
What is the Polaris Project?
So they're an international anti-human trafficking organization, one of many. Shared Hope is another group. Dan O'Brien joined us. He's the chairman at our event.
And they actually give a grade, a letter grade, to how well or how poorly we're doing. And we're doing really poorly.
And so as of 2011, we had an F, and there are 10 criteria. Most of them revolve around, do you have the right legislative framework in place to lower the barrier to for prosecution of these cases, identification and prosecution. And I'm happy to say that after the last few years of effort, a couple of very important bills, one last year and another one following it up this year, but especially the one last year, which I can tell you about, that we have now moved to a B as a state.
That's a big step forward. All right, and the term human trafficking is very deliberate. That prostitute that might have gotten busted, it's not like she lives here necessarily. Right. She might be smuggled away to some other place. So this is an underground movement that moves women and children all over the place to make it very difficult for them to get caught, and always to keep them in a very strange place where they're very insecure. Do I have that part right? You
do, and even though there are local teens that are trafficked, and boys and girls, I don't want to leave the boys out. Boys are also victims, and that's happening just people right here that live in Colorado, but as you've said, as well across state lines and across international borders, and just moving them. And Denver, of course, as we know, is the largest city within a 600-mile radius. We have, you know, big sporting events, and that's often a place where trafficking takes place.
Explain that, because that didn't even occur to me until the news after the Super Bowl, and then recently at the Western Stock Show.
Yes.
That when the trafficking means people are trafficked in because they know there's going to be a lot of drunk guys and money.
Yes, exactly. It's such a disgusting underbelly of our culture, and it's such a tragedy for the kids that are caught in that. And just also, it broke my heart, and it breaks my heart to realize how many women are trafficking kids. And you think, aren't you a mother or an aunt to somebody? How could you have your heart be so hard to do that? And the gal at the stock show was in fact a woman, and the children were from 14 to 17 years old that were being trafficked there. I mentioned Shared Hope International. They did a series of ads, and they did a real PR campaign at this year's Arizona, based Super Bowl, and it was powerful. They had these boxes that looked like a Barbie doll box, and they literally put teenage girls in these boxes on the corners around the Super Bowl event. I am not for sale. Very powerful PR campaign. They also did quite a number of local PSAs. It was within Arizona. Arizona is not for sale, and they got some really big names in the football world to come out against that.
There is a difference between prostitution and human trafficking. One, I'm going to take a shot at it. One has a voluntary participant, and one is involuntary, and that's a difficult thing to be able to identify, right?
It is, and even within, quote, prostitution, where adults are supposedly consenting and they want that life, I bet if there were studies done and you really dug into what the real dynamic was that was happening there, there's a story for every one of those women and why they're in that life. It isn't, I don't think it's just waking up and looking at your career choices and just randomly picking, am I going to be a nurse, a doctor, or a prostitute? I just don't think it's that simple.
So Colorado has a B. What does it need to get an A? What do we not know that we need to?
I think that's a good question. I wish I had the answer. I don't have the answer to that. I will tell you one of the reasons that we have a B and no longer have an F is that we brought our laws up to the federal standard of defining prostitution. Last year, Dan Norberg and Representative Beth McCann, Representative Norberg and McCann co-sponsored a bill, many other co-sponsors as well, and they defined that trafficking of a minor is a sex crime. It sounds like, hello, of course that should be true, but it wasn't true prior to that.
Oh, we don't have much time, so if people suspect something, see something, feel uncomfortable about a situation they see, what should they do?
Well, we have a phone number on the screen, I hope. I think it's up there. And I appreciate you all putting that up. That is the hotline number for CONET. And please call that line. Or if you're trapped in trafficking, you just happen to be seeing this show, try to steal away and make that call.
People want more information, where do they go? Is there a website?
Yes, our website is ht-colorado.org.
ht-colorado.org. Tamra, thank you. Thank you. Listen for me on KHOW. Tell a friend, and we'll see you next week.